Advocacy groups and legal experts in South Africa are pushing for change to the term child pornography to child sexual abuse material in criminal law. They argue that the current term implies child consent and minimises the reality of victimization. So in its 2021 report, the South African Law Commission recommended this change in the Sexual Offences Act and the Child Justice Act. Let's discuss this further now with Dr. Joan van Niekerk, who's a consultant social worker specialising in children's rights, and Ephraim Tlhako from the Film and Publications Board. To you both, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let me start with you, Dr. Joan. I mean, what are the complexities of using the term child pornography, and I'm not sure if this is the correct word, versus child sexual abuse material? There is a difference in terminology because of the seriousness of the issue at hand, isn't it?
Absolutely. One of our concerns over time has been the lack of seriousness with which child pornography is seen. And one has to look at the new term, which emphasizes that this is an abusive situation in which the child is placed. In order for child pornography to be made, in order for child abuse material to be made, the child has to be abused. There is a child behind that camera who is being abused in order for that image to be made. And I think people do not realize that. The pain and suffering of these children, both sometimes physical, psychological, emotional, the exploitation of the child is lost when we use the word child pornography. I just want to add that we are really concerned because the change in terminology and other legislation relating to the safety of children online, the draft legislation and the report was placed before the Ministry of Justice in 2021, and up till now, no visible action has been taken.
Dr. Joan, we'll come back to that in just a moment. Mr. Tlhako, I know that the Film and Publications Board has also been critical of the use of terminology, and you're also looking at changing, the Film and Publications Act.
Yes, thank you so much, Griselda. Yes, indeed, we are also through our Department of Communication and Digital Technologies working on our submissions to make changes to the Films and Publications Act. As it is, the Amendment Act changed in 2019 criminalizes the possession, production, and distribution of child pornography, and our act makes references to child pornography. So we're already making those in line with what Dr. Joan is. And the non-seriousness of it, we realize that we need to make submissions to changing such legislation. But our act, also just to go a step further, is not just looking at abuse of children, because we do agree that this is the abuse of children. There's no way that children are participating willingly in this act. But we're also criminalizing the possession and distribution of abuse material. So it could be violence or any other physical abuse against a child. And then that's a criminal offense to distribute such content.
Yeah, and perhaps, Mr. Tlhako, or even you, Dr. Joan, I mean, do we, even as the media, and I also want to question ourselves, I mean, even people in the sector, the children's rights sector, understand the significance of using the right terminology? And I also want to say, Dr. Joan, with law enforcement, when you report a matter, do they understand the difference between child pornography and child sexual abuse material, or even the courts?
Not always. And this is a very big problem, because if it's not seen as serious by the justice system and appropriate sentences applied to people who download and use child sexual abuse or child abuse images, then the whole scenario is not going to change. I just have to mention that issues relating to images of child abuse, sexual and physical, and I applaud the Films and Publications Board for their using a generic term in terms of violence. Then how, if it's not handed down appropriately, sentences and investigations done, then how will the general public know? And this is where the media is very important, and the need to report on what is actually happening to children through using the correct terminology.
And I'm sure you would agree with that, Mr. Tlhako. I know that you spoke about, the amendments to the Act, but it's going to take a while. I do understand that you've started the process as well with communications with the Department of Communication, but this is not a process that is going to change overnight. Dr. Joan was also talking about the lengthy process, how long this has been sitting with the Justice Department, and there's not much movement, according to Dr. Joan. Same with you. This is not going to change overnight.
Definitely, because any changes to the legislation, unfortunately, has to go through the legislative process, the parliamentary process, public comments process. But it doesn't kill for us to really start working on it. But yes, I think from an expectation management, there's that, we need to manage those, that it's going to take some time for us to get there. But we can really start having this kind of engagements. And with the likes of Dr. Joan, we can start already making that advocacy and ensuring that, like as you were saying, Griselda, the media and the public is aware and anticipate the changes that are coming. But unfortunately, with any legislation, we have seen that it is a parliamentary process and we need to allow the process to go through.
Yeah,
Griselda, I want to comment here.
Yes, please.
We're talking about the protection of children. We're talking about the safety of children online with the SA Law Reform Commission report and the draft legislation. Children only have one childhood. If they are harmed during childhood, it is absolutely clear from research on adverse childhood experiences that harm affects their adult behavior. I'm sorry, I think it's unacceptable that the Department of Justice has put dealing with this report on hold until it's on the legislative program in 2026. It's unacceptable. We talk about children being our future, but if we don't protect our children, our future as a country is compromised. It's not acceptable to have these long delays. They can be dealt with. When government chooses to move quickly, it can. And I am advocating very strongly for the changes, not just the change in terminology, but the whole draft legislation developed by the SA Law Reform Commission is fast-tracked and looked at and goes to Parliament for discussion far more rapidly than 2026.
And I guess this would even include, Dr. Joan, even the irresponsible images of sexual abuse, that also needs to be addressed.
Absolutely. And I'm very interested in Mr. Tlhako's comment that all violence against children is going to be looked at. In other words, it won't just be sexual abuse images. It will be inclusive of physical violence. And this will also stop the contagion of scholars or learners taking photographs of fights at school and these being placed on the internet. These videos do have some value in identifying the children involved and responding to them appropriately, but putting them into public spaces is not appropriate. Any image of a child being harmed, because very sadly, when it comes to peer-on-peer abuse, it sometimes causes a contagion and a flurry of similar images.
Mr. Tlhako, I'm sure you'd agree.
If I may come in there.
Yes, please. I was actually going to ask you to do that. We've seen so many incidents of peer-on-peer violence. There's no shortage of that on social media, where there's bullying taking place in schools. And one kind of wonders, what are the effects of this staying on the internet for the rest of this child's life and what the ramifications would be even in their adulthood, because what you put on the internet simply stays there.
Yes, and this is why when we're celebrating on the 11th of February this year, when we're celebrating Safer Internet Day, we always make sure that these campaigns, we take them to the schools. Our event was held at the school where we preach the message of online safety to the kids at that young age, and just on how to be responsible citizens, digital citizens going forward. And like you are saying, to remind them that the internet never forgets, and the psychological impacts going forward into the future. One day you're going to be 25, you're going to be 30, you're going to see those images of you when you were still a sort of a child, and the abuse that you had perpetuated on other children. So we take our message to schools, working closely with teachers, parents, ensuring that there's awareness on online safety, because like as all of us agree, the core mandate of the FPB is just to protect children against not only exposure to harmful content, but against exploitation online and how to protect themselves in the online space.
I wish we had more time for this discussion.
I agree.
Please go ahead, Dr. Joan. We still have time.
I agree. I do believe, though, that legislation that protects children is important, because part of growing up is that children make mistakes. Sometimes they make impulsive decisions that need to be addressed. But if we have protective legislation in place, we minimize that kind of harm. I'm not saying it will never, ever happen, but what I am saying is that there will be a protective umbrella that will minimize the number of children exposed to adult pornography, which is also a massive problem in this country. And research does show us that that does fuel sexual offences between children. And we are very concerned about that. So we need to protect children as well as educate them, and their parents and caregivers, and our educators, and our police, and our judiciary, and our media.
Absolutely. All right. Consultant social worker on children's rights and child protection, Dr. Joan van Niekerk, as well as Mr. Tlhako from the Film and Publications Board. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. Mr. Ephraim Tlhako, talking to us about a very important discussion that needs to be had about, the change of the term child pornography to child sexual abuse material. They're arguing that the current term implies child consent and basically minimizes the reality of victimization. Thank you very much indeed to the both of you.